For those of you who are first-time attendees this morning, we do these breakfasts quarterly, and we do our very best to bring you topics of interest that are informative and interesting. So again, welcome everyone, and we'll begin. This morning, I am particularly pleased to be able to introduce to you a gentleman who will surely make a very positive impact on Lake County. Mike Nerheim is the Lake County State's Attorney, having replaced former State's Attorney Mike Waller, who decided to retire after a long career in public office. Mike Nerheim has a very, very interesting story to tell, both personally and professionally, and I will do my level best to provide you with some biographical information on him, as well as to cover many issues that he and I deemed relevant and interesting. I had the opportunity a few weeks ago to meet with Mike, and to say the very least, I left the meeting very impressed and very, very encouraged. So let me begin by telling you a little bit about Mike personally. Mike is married to his wife, Andy, and they are the proud parents of 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Mike attended law school at John Marshall in Chicago, and during 5 summers, he interned in the state's attorney's office. According to Mike, he has done every job in that office, including serving coffee and filing papers. Following law school, he worked for approximately 7 years as an assistant state's attorney. Mike told me that from a very early age, he envisioned himself in the role of the state's attorney of Lake County, always with the thought in his mind that he would make the office better. In 2012, in a 3-way Republican primary, during which Mike admitted to me he was not the chosen candidate of the party, he came from behind to win the race. He then defeated the Democratic candidate, and today he is living proof that he is living his dream. Mike has extensive experience working in all criminal divisions of the Lake County State's Attorney's Office. As an assistant state's attorney, he was well respected by federal, state, and local law enforcement for his guidance and approval of criminal charges and for his strong commitment to representing the needs of the victims. He is widely recognized for vigorously prosecuting those who have violated the law, while respecting both the rights of victims and the rights of the accused to ensure that no one is wrongfully convicted. He teaches evidence and DNA and has successfully used DNA in prosecution of criminal sexual assault. He has been appointed by the courts to investigate post-conviction issues pursuant to the Illinois post-conviction laws. He has written and argued post-conviction petitions on behalf of indigent defendants in defense of their constitutional rights. Mike is actively involved in supporting the Lake County community. He serves as teen court judge in Warren Township, advisory council member of Staben House, and vice chair of the Lake County Bar Association. He is also on the board of directors of NICASA, Lake County Crime Stoppers, and FIST. He is the chairman of the Lake County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council. Needless to say, he's a very, very busy man. Now, I'm going to tell you something that he told me kind of off the record. He actually confided to me that on the weekends, he can't wait to get back to work on Monday morning, and that his wife thinks he's nuts. But he also reminded me of the old adage that if you truly love what you're doing, it really isn't work at all. So now that you know a little bit about Mike Nerheim personally, let's learn exactly what he does and why he loves doing it so much. While I'm sure all of you have heard at some point something about the state's attorney's office, I'm quite sure that many in the room don't know exactly what goes on in the state's attorney's office. So let's take a deeper dive into the subject and find out exactly what goes on there. First, welcome, Mike, and thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
So when I met with you, the one sentence that you gave me, when I asked you exactly what you do, is you said, my job is to enforce the law. So what does that mean to all of us?
Well, first of all, thank you for your very kind, I feel like I can leave now. That was
Well, you can't.
All right. And I have to be on my best behavior because my boss from Columbia College is here, so I have to make sure I do my job. But the state's attorney's office is essentially the county prosecutor's office. In Illinois, we call them state's attorneys. On TV, they're DAs, the DA. I think Illinois is one of the only states where we're called state's attorneys, but every county has an elected state's attorney, and depending on the size of the county, there's a number of assistant state's attorneys and staff that work in the office. Lake County, we have the third biggest state's attorney's office in Illinois. There's 144 people that work in my office. 74 of them are attorneys. I have 9 investigators, 16 victim witness counselors, paralegals, support staff. So it's a very, very good sized office. There's 2 main divisions. There's the civil division and the criminal division. I think the criminal division is what most people think of, and it is the job of the criminal division to prosecute any state crime that happens in Lake County. So anything from a speeding ticket to a murder case, if it happens in Lake County, the state's attorney's office prosecutes it. And again, there's the civil division, which is sort of the often forgotten part of the state's attorney's office, and there are 10 attorneys that work in that division, and they represent the county in civil cases and all the elected officials in Lake County and the county board and so on and so forth. I'm essentially the attorney for all the elected officials in Lake County and the county board.
So what does your average day look like?
Well, it's all different. And actually, I'm sure the people in this room can appreciate this. The hardest days I have are the days when there's nothing on the calendar, because it's sort of putting out one fire after the other. But there's really no average day, which is what I like most about my job. And what I started first when I was elected, because the office is very big, and I had worked there, but it had been about 5 years since I'd been in the office, and there was some turnover. It was important to me to meet everybody in the office and have everybody, give everybody an opportunity to meet me one-on-one. So what I did on day one is began a series of interviews with everybody in the office, all 144 people, and it took about a month and a half, about 4 or 5 hours a day, every day, where I would sit with everybody in the office individually and talk to them and give them an opportunity to meet me and know my vision for the office. And I wanted to be assured from them that they share my vision for the state's attorney's office, and I wanted to be assured that they appreciate the fact that they're there to seek justice, and I'm not concerned about convictions or win-loss records as long as people are doing what's right and seeking justice. That's my philosophy, and I wanted to make sure that everybody in the office shared that. And I also wanted to listen to them and hear their ideas. And it was kind of funny, because after the first few interviews, word sort of got out among the office that I was going to ask people any ideas they had about how to make the office better. And a file clerk came in with 15 pages of typewritten notes on all her ideas on how to make the office better. But I thought that was really neat, because basically every idea she had was going to make her job harder, was going to add work for her. But she was concerned about customer service. She was concerned about doing her job as effectively as she could, and I really appreciated that. So there's some changes that I'm slowly implementing in the office, and a lot of the ideas I had initially, but some of the new ideas I got actually from these interviews. So
it was worth interviewing everybody. So when I had the opportunity to meet with Mike, and we spent probably 2 hours together just sitting and talking, we identified a couple subjects, and mostly Mike did it, that were really at the top of his priority list and things that I thought might be interesting to the audience here this morning. Not long ago, at our wake-up breakfast, I had the opportunity to interview Waukegan Police Chief Dan Greathouse, and we discussed the subject of crime. We discussed it specifically related to Waukegan, but this morning, with the state's attorney here, I'd like to talk about that very same subject again. We can talk about it relative to Waukegan, but I'd also like to talk about it in terms of its regional impact on the entire county.
Statistically, across the nation, crime is actually down. There's been a trend over probably the last 5-6 years where crime has gone down. However, in areas like Lake County, we've seen an increase in particularly in gang crime, as well as heroin is really a major problem in Lake County, and it's all over Lake County. And I believe the greatest threat to Lake County, to our community, to our kids, to our families, are street gangs and heroin. And they're tied together, because a lot of the heroin that is brought into Lake County that is sold is brought and sold by street gangs.
So educate us on these gangs, because when we think of gangs, we think of Chicago and the inner city in Chicago. But you shared with me, and I'd like you to share with everybody today, some of the names of the gangs and some of the presence that these folks have?
Well, there's a tie to Chicago because a lot of the gangs that traditionally have been in Chicago, as Cook County and Chicago have shut down some of the affordable housing projects in Chicago, a lot of those folks have sort of moved into Lake County, and they see Lake County as prime turf because there's money here and there's areas where they can come and sell drugs and bring the violence. And it presents a very unique challenge to us in Lake County because a lot of the police departments in Lake County are generally small police departments. And the gang issue in Lake County is really a county-wide problem. It's not something that's limited to Waukegan or North Chicago or Round Lake. These gangs really kind of spread throughout the county. And my challenge as the top law enforcement officer in Lake County is to bring everybody together and get all the chiefs of police and all the law enforcement agencies to see this as a Lake County issue and not a town-by-town issue.
How old are these gangs? I mean, the members of the gangs, are they kids? Are they older?
What makes it even more challenging is there's a perception that some of these street gang members are sort of wayward youth that if we could just get them involved in Little League, they'll stay away from the gangs. It's not quite that simple. A lot of these gang members are basically brought into these gangs from birth. When they're born, they get little booties, baby booties with gang colors on them, and their parents are in the gangs, their grandparents are in the gangs. So it's a very deeply rooted problem, and I believe we need to fight gangs from both ends. A very aggressive prosecution at the top, and also involved in gang outreach programs at the bottom end in the schools, and try and help divert some of these kids away from joining gangs in the first place. We have a new law in Illinois, a RICO statute, which is the same model that the federal authorities use to take down organized crime. The legislature, thanks in part to Senator Link, gave us this tool where we can use that model to fight gangs on a state level, and it's a very powerful tool and hasn't been used yet, but it will be used in Lake County.
This may sound silly, but is there a way for the average person to identify gang activity or gangs in their neighborhoods, or what do they do if they think there's gang activity in their neighborhoods? Waukegan
Police has a very good community police model, and each community has a police officer that's assigned to their neighborhood, and I'm sure if somebody had a question, they could get involved with the local police department. They'd be happy to educate people in terms of identifying graffiti on your property or the different colors. So it's important that people know where they are and what they're doing. But again, it's very important to stress that this isn't just a Waukegan issue. And I've gone to every chief of police in Lake County. I've talked to police officers all around Lake County. And the good thing is you'll find a handful of officers in every department that know exactly what's going on within their respective town with regard to gangs. They have a pretty good idea of who's there, where they are, what they're doing. The problem is and this falls on me, is to get everybody talking, to get Antioch talking with Waukegan, because it's, again, these gangs go all over Lake County, and they don't just stay in Lake County. The Latin Kings, for example, there's a tremendous population in Kenosha. So I've talked to the authorities in Kenosha County. I've talked to the DEA, the FBI, the ATF. They're interested in working together to tackle this on a bigger scale than just one case at a time. Now,
Mike has cautioned me that there are some things that he will not be able to expound on today, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and ask you a question that perhaps is very relevant. Unfortunately, there was the recent death of the young woman in North Chicago. She was from the city of Chicago, and she was visiting family, I believe, in North Chicago, and she was killed. And I know that you mentioned something to me earlier about something that may happen later today. Was that gang related?
It was, and I can't talk too much yet because these individuals haven't been officially charged yet. But this is just a tragic example of the violence that we see in Lake County. And the horrible irony in this case is this young woman's sister. On Friday night, President Obama was in Hyde Park giving a talk on gun violence, and her sister was in the audience at that talk, and then hours later her sister is murdered in North Chicago due to gun violence. So this is something that we read about too often and we hear all too often, and sometimes we think, well, that just happens in Chicago, but it doesn't. It happens here on our streets, in our neighborhoods, and it's just a tragic example of what we're talking about today.
That's a kind of a good segue. Let's talk about wrongful convictions. So this is something in Lake County that we've all heard about many times, unfortunately, many more times than we would have liked to have heard. We can refer back to the Rivera case, the Staker case, the Hobbs case, the Benny Starks case. We have a history in Lake County, unfortunately, of gaining some notoriety about wrongful convictions. So I would like you to address that in terms of what your office is going to do about this retroactively and then going forward.
Sure. You know, the job of a prosecutor is a little unique. It's very unique in terms of being a lawyer because we have an adversarial legal system. So when I was a defense attorney in private practice, when I went to court, I represented my client, and 100% of my effort was to my client, and that's how most attorneys work. When you're a prosecutor, it's different because you represent the people of the state of Illinois, and you represent justice, and your job is to represent the victim, but your job is also to make sure that the defendant is treated fairly. So oftentimes when you're in court as a prosecutor, if you see something that isn't right, if you see the defendant not being represented properly by his or her attorney, or you see some rights being violated by the police, it's your job as the prosecutor to step in and make sure that that person is treated fairly. And a lot of people think the prosecutor's job is to just go out there and convict, and it's the defense attorney's job to get the person off, and that's not the case. Our job is to seek justice. And with regard to wrongful convictions, there have unfortunately been a series of cases that we continue to hear about in Lake County, and it's become a situation where on a national level, when the discussion of wrongful convictions is brought up, Lake County, Illinois is mentioned, unfortunately. And it's important to note that sadly, wrongful convictions don't just occur in Lake County, they happen all over. In fact, Cook County has vastly more than we do, but really any wrongful conviction is one too many. So coming into the office, I knew that we had this reputation, I knew that there was this issue. I could have basically had two choices. I could say, well, that didn't happen under my watch, there's a new sheriff in town and we're going to move forward and ignore it. Or we can recognize that it's an issue and try and identify what went wrong, where it went wrong, when it went wrong, and try and put some procedures into place to make sure this never happens again. So I chose the latter and the little more difficult road. But one of the things we're doing, and actually tomorrow we're swearing in a case review panel, which is something I've put into place in Lake County, which is a panel of people that I've assembled from all over Illinois, a bipartisan group of people that really have no ties to the state's attorney's office, retired judges, retired defense attorneys, retired prosecutors, people with a wealth of experience to come in, to volunteer their time, to look at cases where there's any question, to just bring a completely independent, fresh set of eyes to any case, and also to sit down and take a real hard look at this issue, see what went wrong, and help identify protocols that we can put into place to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And the cases, all the cases you talked about involve DNA, and there's been a lot of talk about DNA. We're very familiar with DNA, and DNA is a very powerful tool both for the prosecution and the defense. But wrongful convictions don't always involve DNA issues. In fact, most wrongful convictions, when you look at it on a national level, involve wrongful identification. So we're not just going to look at this as a DNA problem. We're going to look at everything. And again, when we can put protocols into place to work with the police to ensure these cases don't ever happen again, because the police, I've spent a lot of time talking to the police on this issue. Nobody wants wrongful convictions. Nobody in law enforcement wants to convict the wrong person. When you do that, the entire criminal justice system, the entire purpose of our system has failed. And also, when you convict the wrong person, the real person's gone free. So we can't allow those things to happen.
Well, and in addition to that, there's a huge cost to the county.
There is, and the reason I can't talk about those cases specifically is there's pending lawsuits right now with all three of those cases, or at least two of the three of them. So.
Because those are the cases that you most often hear about with respect to the state's attorney's office. Okay, now you talked about the case review panel, but you also told me that you're going to implement the Second Chance program.
Right, there's a program that's modeled after a program in Kane County called the Second Chance Program. It'll be called the Alternative Prosecution Program in Lake County, but essentially what it is it's a diversion program, and it's for first-time nonviolent offenders, including felony cases. If they qualify for the program, if they take responsibility for their crime, if the victim consents and the police consent, these people will be given an opportunity to sort of pay their debt to society by way of restitution, public service, get a job, go to school, get treatment, stay crime-free, most importantly. And if you do those things, those cases will be dismissed. That does a couple of things. It allows people to sort of make that, I don't want to say a mistake, because a crime is never a mistake. People make a choice to commit a crime. But they commit that, and again, this isn't for everybody. This is first-time nonviolent offenses. They commit the crime, they take responsibility, they pay their debt to society, and then they can move on with their life without having that conviction on their record, which really prevents people from getting jobs and becoming productive members of society and paying taxes and starting businesses and things like that. The other thing it will do, though, is it will help alleviate a lot of the overcrowding we have both in our jail and in our court system, so we can focus our time more effectively going after these murder cases and these drug dealers and gangbangers and the serious cases, the violent cases that are affecting our community.
One of the topics that's in the news every single day, both at a local, state, and federal level, is the subject of guns. Conceal carry, the prevalence of guns today, how guns are purchased, how they're bought and sold. Tell me what your office is doing and what you specifically feel about that.
Well, you know, it's a tough issue. It's a tough issue politically, and I think the easy answer is just, you know, the quick answer is ban guns, but I don't think that's the effective answer, and it's not realistic. We're going to have concealed carry in Illinois. It's going to happen. So we have to figure out how we can work with the state police to make sure that it's effectively put into place. And I know the legislature is working to come up with some programs. I think training is obviously going to be crucial. I talk to prosecutors all across Illinois and actually all across the United States. There's really no consensus among prosecutors in terms of this issue. When you talk about gun violence, there's talk about banning assault rifles, but when you look in Chicago, for instance, the vast majority of those murders are not being committed by assault rifles, they're being committed by handguns. So again, there's really no consensus on the issue, but where we all agree, where all prosecutors agree, and I think all lawmakers agree, is there's a mental health component here. And we need to focus on mental health. We need to make sure we're treating people, and most importantly, identifying people that have mental health issues. And one of the things I'm undertaking is we're going back because, again, we're going to have some form of a concealed carry permit in Illinois. Right now, we're the only state that doesn't have a concealed carry permit, and the federal courts have said we have to come up with one. What we're doing now is we're going back in our records as far back as we can go, pulling out cases where there's been a finding where somebody's been found unfit for trial or mentally unstable, and making sure that that information gets to the state police. So when folks several months from now start applying for these gun permits, that they'll identify these cases where there's been a prior finding of unfitness.
Well, I know everybody was across the country was so upset with what happened in Sandy Hook and to the tragedy that occurred there. But when you think about the fact that those guns were in that woman's house and her son, who obviously had issues, had access to the guns, what can law enforcement do about cases like that?
Well, law enforcement's been proactive, and there's gun buyback programs that Crime Stoppers and the Chief of Police are working on right now, where people can turn in their guns for a small amount of money. Those have been effective, and it's not ever a situation where gangbangers are sort of turning in their machine guns, but what happens in those cases is usually it's the widow who turns in her former husband's deer rifle or something like that, and those are very effective because it gets those guns out of those houses, because a lot of the guns that end up on the street are either through straw purchases where people send somebody into a gun store that has a clean record to buy a gun, and that person then gives the gun to the gang member or the criminal, and Senator Kirk is proposing some bipartisan legislation to put some teeth into a federal law to combat that, and I think that's going to be a powerful tool. The other way that these guns are being obtained is through break-ins, where people are breaking into the homes of people that have these old guns, and they're stealing them and using them to commit crime. So that's why the gun buyback programs are effective.
So if these gang members were actually born into these gangs, like you said, the grandparents and the parents, and how then is there any hope for really, disbanding these gangs and getting rid of them?
Well, the RICO statute allows us to really go after the entire operation. And the gangs have gotten smart. What they generally do is, if somebody's a high-ranking gang member, they don't necessarily walk around with a gun. The 14-year-old kid carries the gun, and when they want the gun, the kid gives them the gun, they do their thing, and they give the gun back. What the RICO statute allows is, if a 14-year-old gets caught with a gun and there's people in between him and I as the high-ranking gang member, it allows all those people in that entire chain to be prosecuted. So it's a very effective tool. And again, it's a deeply rooted issue, but I think aggressive prosecution will work combined with outreach programs. There are programs like Ceasefire and other programs in Lake County that have former gang members that will go in and talk to kids to help encourage them to leave that lifestyle. And look, I don't want to prosecute kids. I said the other day, I don't want to prosecute kids for shooting kids. So if we can prevent kids from joining gangs in the first place, or work with community groups to help get kids out of gangs and give them an alternative, that's obviously the best way to do it.
So now you've found yourself in the office of State's Attorney, your life's dream. Now that you're here, what do you think? I heard you talking to Jeff Pavletic earlier about how optimistic and eager you are when you go to work every day. There was discussion about how long that might last.
Well, you know what? I love it. This is what I've always wanted to do, and I'm happy doing this. And the day I'm not happy doing it, I'll do something else. But I think it's important to have that fire, that drive. And what I'm most impressed with the office, and I got this when I did this series of interviews, is it's not just me. I mean, everybody that works in that office goes to work every day with a passion to seek justice. And one of the things I'm trying to do is make that office a lot more transparent. The first person I hired was a communications person to just open up the doors of the office to the extent we can, and to allow people through the media to see who we are and what we do. And I think if you were a fly on the wall in a prosecutor's office right now and you overheard two prosecutors talking about a case, you'd be very impressed, because the perception might be that they're sitting there talking about how they can wrongfully convict an innocent person. The reality is they're probably sitting there talking about what is the right thing to do on this case and how do we help this person. And the greatest thing about being a prosecutor is you have the power to do what's right, and you have the power to charge people and prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. You also have the power, if you think it's appropriate, to drop charges or to reduce charges, give somebody a break if you think they deserve a break. So there's a lot of power, there's a lot of discretion, and I'm very proud to work in an office full of people that are really concerned with exercising that discretion appropriately. And the young woman that came to me with the 15 pages of notes on how to make the office better, again, all those ideas were about how we can serve the public better. She wanted to put on our counter where people come to file papers, she wanted to put a little ledge there so people could sign their name and they wouldn't have to write on the wall. I think when you perceive government offices, when you call a government office, there's this perception that you're going to get either a machine or somebody that just doesn't care. And I know if you call my office, you're going to be treated professionally, you're going to be treated with respect, and you're going to be treated kindly, whether you call the office or come to the office, and I'm very proud of that.
Well, we have time for some questions. I don't want to be the only one asking. Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask the State's Attorney? Now's your time. No questions?
I have a question for you.
Alderman Cunningham.
In reference to your gun, the gun laws, as what I see, particularly on the front line, you see these illegal guns. I shouldn't say illegal guns. These guns being sold to irresponsible users. I don't know if that's illegally or legally. That's where I see the core problem. And then when those irresponsible users get them, that's when the problem starts. How does your office, and working with the various police departments, how can we tackle that from a front line, using the community for those?
Well, and that's a great point. People talk about creating these gun laws. I think we have in Illinois We have some pretty tough gun laws already. I mean, if you get caught with a gun while you're committing a felony crime, that's a mandatory minimum 15 years in prison. So we have some very tough laws in Illinois with a lot of teeth to them. And what you're getting to is it's really not so much a gun issue, but it's a people issue. And we need to start working with community groups to help educate people and to work with people and make sure guns aren't getting into the wrong hands. And again, I think we have the laws in place. There are some gaps in the federal laws with regard to the straw purchases that's currently being identified. But as far as state level gun laws and people possessing guns and using them illegally, we have those laws in place, but we need to work with people to make sure that guns aren't being put in the wrong hands.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Do you have plans for a mentorship program for young students?
We do currently do that already, and we have a great relationship with St. Martin de Porres, where we have kids that work in our office that help. We work with Waukegan High School, and people come in and file and work with the people in the office. And I think those are great programs because it allows those kids to come in and see what we do and who we are, and they're really part of our office, and they get to take that back to their friends, hopefully, and let them know that there are a lot of good things being done, and it makes them feel good to be part of what we do. So we encourage that, and we encourage if there are people that want to come in and job shadow or walk around the courthouse for a day, high school kids that are thinking about going to law school, have them call me, because we're happy to bring them around the courthouse, let them see what we do. I think it's a great program. And as far as mentoring, I'm also going to institute a mentoring program for my young attorneys, whereby each new attorney is partnered with a senior level attorney that is their mentor, that they kind of work together throughout their careers and learn from each other as they go.
You mentioned the mental health aspect of some of the offenders. With all of the cutbacks and closing of mental health facilities, how do you envision that working?
Well, a lot of it is and that's a real major problem in Illinois, and we need to get funding for mental health facilities to be reopened, because sadly what happens, and I know Chief Witherspoon can speak to this, a lot of people in our jail right now are people that have mental health issues, and they commit these crimes, they're identified, and they're put in jail, and they're not necessarily being treated because there's really nowhere else for them to go. And that's really a funding issue at the state level. But what we can do is we can at least identify cases where there has been a finding, where somebody has been unfit or confined because of a mental issue. We need to at least make sure that the state police knows about those folks. So, God forbid if somebody was found unfit for trial, and then 10 years later they go and they get a concealed carry permit and something happens and we knew about it. And that's not something that we can allow to happen.
Anyone else?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
What steps are you taking to include more diversity in the state's attorney's office?
And that's a really great point. When I came in the office, diversity is an issue in terms of the attorneys in the office don't necessarily reflect our diverse community in Lake County. I think I know there's 2 African American attorneys, there's 2 Hispanic attorneys in the office out of 74, and that does not reflect Lake County. We have, in terms of sex, I think we probably have more female attorneys than male attorneys, so we're doing okay in that regard. But we really need to improve diversity, because we represent the people of Lake County, and when you go to court, you need to know that the person understands what you're going through every day and understands your issues. So there's 2 issues with that. One is I've implemented a residency policy, where if you're going to work for the state's attorney's office, you're going to serve the people of Lake County, you're going to live in Lake County. And a lot of people right now, some people may live in Chicago or they may live in Wisconsin, and you need to be invested in your community if you're going to serve people, and you need to know what's going on. So that's a new policy that we're putting into place. Second thing I created was a hiring committee where I put 5 people in place in the office, because I have 3 positions open right now, entry-level prosecutor positions that actually don't pay very much. But the job market out there is so bad, and everybody in this room knows that. The amount of resumes I get for these 3 entry-level positions is just mind-boggling. People with 10, 15 years experience, people from the best law schools in the country are applying for an entry-level traffic prosecutor position. that's great for us as a community because it allows me to really go out and pick the best and the brightest prosecutors to come work in the state's attorney's office. But you know, I think on day one when I came into the office, I had a stack of resumes, you know, this high on my desk. So people aren't going to be hired based on who, you know, their parents being a judge or their mother being a local attorney. People are going to be hired based on their qualifications. So this interview panel is people in my office from the civil division and the criminal division that will interview this first group of people, and I'm completely staying out of that process. And if I have one opening and 50 applicants, I'll ask them for the top 3 in their interview, and then I will interview those top 3 and make the selection. I've gone out and talked to different groups like the Waukegan Chamber of Commerce, different community groups in Lake County, legal groups, and asked them for minority applicants to send to me, because we need to improve diversity in Lake County. And now sadly, when you come to African American attorneys, for example, there's just not a lot in Lake County. And I've talked to groups in Lake County. There used to be an African American Lawyers Association in Lake County that has been disbanded. I've talked to people about getting that back up and running, so we have a group that I can go to and ask for applicants, because again, I'm interested in the most qualified candidates, but also improving diversity in the office. I know that was a long answer to your question. I'm a lawyer, so sorry.
Well, out of respect for everybody's time, I think we're going to have to wrap it up. And I'm sure we could probably go on for another hour asking questions, because as we sit and listen to Mike, more and more things come to mind. He's been very, very kind to do this for us this morning. And actually, I said, what happens if people have more questions and there's no time? And he gave me a phone number that you may call him at, and that is 847-377-3000. So if anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to call his office. I would like to thank everybody for coming here this morning and joining us for this first breakfast of 2013. I particularly want to thank Mike Nerheim, who has spent an inordinate amount of time with me lately, filling me in on what he does and how he does it, and I'm sure that we will be asking you back. And let's see if you're this happy a year from now.
Oh, bless you.